Welcome, everyone. We start a new subject this evening. Use communication to build relationships. You might think, oh, I know how to talk. I know how to write an email. Amazing. All very helpful skills and abilities to have. But when we look at this subject, we're looking at it at a lens of how can I build or contribute positively to a relationship. In particular in the workplace. So I want you to think about, when we go through this subject, what's helpful communication in the workplace, what's helpful communication with some of the clients you might work with. Now, some of you are working in this type of field already, some of you are not, it doesn't matter. This is a common subject in many, many courses, not just in the community services framework. So as we go through this course, I want you to think about, is there anything that you could consider for yourself or reflect on or improve in this class space with your peers, because this is a replication of the workplace in a way. And then what you might take away when you get into the workplace in this particular field, or in any workplace you're currently in, how can you help relationships there? Thanks, Bog. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I am meeting on. That is the lands of the Dharawal people. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and welcome Aboriginal colleagues who may be joining this evening. Our class rules, if you've been playing along later on watching the recording, you've probably seen this. If you haven't, these are our general class rules that are relevant every class. I won't read through them all every week, but I'll just highlight a couple of points. If we're in this class space, in a live class, if you like, then it's helpful if you do have your cameras on. I appreciate when people send me messages if they're eating or on shift or something. That's okay. Just, do what you need to do. But it is helpful if people are in class so that I can have as much attention as possible and put you into breakout spaces and know that you might contribute or not contribute. But you tell me where you're at if there's something else going on for you during our class space. If you need to disappear from your computer, you need to get something to eat, to drink, need to smoke, that's quite okay. Feel free to turn your camera off, do what you need to do, come back. We will have breaks. I am happy if you send me a message if you need to take an extra break or two yourself. That's not a problem. We have our breaks scheduled, 7-ish, 8-ish. The 8-ish break, we kind of look at how we're going for time, how is the energy in the room, and I look at, can we power through? And if we finish a little bit earlier, or do we need that break? Or is everyone just buzzing and we don't need the break and we're going to go to the end of class? So we'll just assess as we get to that time. If something comes up for you that feels a little feels a little uncomfortable, some of the content we talk about brings up something for you, please look after yourself during this class space and afterwards. If you're disappearing for reasons that are a bit sensitive for you, please just send me a message that I know that you're okay. It's helpful if you just send me a message, put it to the group, around if you're popping out or you're eating or you're doing something. But if it's something a bit more personal, feel free to just message me. And I'll check it when I can and just know that you're okay. Just let me know if you're disappearing to, I don't know, take a break, have something to eat, talk to someone, go for a walk, whatever it is. But I just want to make sure that you're okay. And if we keep our microphones on mute for the class, unless you want to say something, which I would love you to say something, to add some information, to ask a question, feel free to just raise your virtual hand. It's one of the tools that you can pick from in the taskbar. If you can't figure that out and something's burning and I'm moving too quickly, just yell it out and I'll take that then and there, and that's quite okay. So this one particularly, we look at communicating at work, and we cover some things that are relevant to the workplace. So policies and protocols, sometimes called procedures, what respectful communication looks and sounds like, and different communication styles and techniques. There are quite a lot of communication styles and techniques out there. Some are a little bit better than others. Some you will like more than others. All have a goal in mind to have respectful communication with people. So I'm going to pop you into breakout spaces now in a moment when I give the instructions. If for whatever reason during class you don't feel like a breakout space is for you, you just send me a message before I do the groups. And if you feel like you can't participate in it because you've got something else going on, that's okay. Just let me know, just so we don't have people waiting in a group space expecting a partner, but someone can't make it, and that's okay. So this activity, I want you to think about when you're in that breakout space is to reflect on a time where you had to adopt your communication style to speak to someone. It's helpful if you think about it speaking to someone who is a client or a co-worker, and think about what you had to change in your approach. Think about any challenges that might have arisen. If you were trying to get a message across and they weren't understanding, how did you try and get them to understand what that message is? How did you feel in the moment? How did you feel reflecting on it afterwards? How do you feel about it reflecting now? So when you think about a time where you had to change your communication style, your normal, natural style, to communicate with someone. And now it could also be that you were aware that you needed to change your communication style. It could have been to speak in another language. It could have been to use different tones of voice to change the environment. But some example that you can share with your partner in the group, and I'll just double check what our numbers are, but it'll either be one person or two people. Something you can share around a time that you had to change and what that was like for you. And do you think it was successful, what you were trying to communicate? I'm going to create some breakout spaces now, but feel free to ask questions or add some commentary if something doesn't make sense. Great. Welcome back, everyone. Would anyone like to share in this space what you talked about? It could be very loose information. It could be very specific information. It could be nothing at all. Sharing in our bigger space is completely up to you. It does help to keep the class flowing, but I'm not making anyone do anything. But Bug, you have your hand up. Over to you.
Yeah, sweet. I just talked about, I work in youth sector in AOD, and I just talked about like altering my communication to chat to them when I'm talking to clients, and how I switch back and forth with coworkers and clients, just because teenagers are teenagers and they communicate the way they do, and being able to like really relate to them and walking the line of firm boundaries while also like being their mate and kind of getting down to their level and chatting to them and letting them communicate the way they need to communicate, right? If they're told like, oh, you can't say that word, or you can't, let's correct the way we're speaking here, they're not going to communicate the way they need to get out what they need to say. So yeah, changing that. And a lot of the kids I work with as well don't have super high levels of education either. So kind of chilling out on the big scary words and kind of going over really complex concepts with them in simple terms, I guess.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for sharing. I think trying to communicate with a teenager needs its own degree, right? It's a whole nother thing to change your communication style and try and learn what they're trying to communicate. And Bug, I'm sure you're very skilled in reading body language, because if you can nail a teenager's body language, you can do anything. Brilliant.
Absolutely, yes.
Mem, you had your hand up briefly. Just check if you wanted to share.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Buck. That was pretty good. I was actually talking in the room and I didn't get to finish what I was going to say, but I thought it was important. I work in aged care, and one of my favorite clients has dementia, and every week, he's a happy guy, And every week he tells me the exact same story, and I never ever cut him off because I don't want to break that joy. And every week I will answer him the exact same way. And I think it's just important to learn a little bit about patience and tolerance. And one of the areas that I still work on, I've come a long way, but I still work on is just the listening skills. Sometimes you just got to listen. It's the best way to communicate. So.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Mem. What a great example and great way to be really present and just respecting where the client's at. And dementia, Alzheimer's is such a horrible disease that I hope we see a cure for in my lifetime, if not later. But it's a really debilitating disease where a lot of people can be in and out of what's real and what's not, and at times can remember that they've already said this 25 times, and they can get frustrated, upset. Of course you would. And then the next moment, forget it again. Or they can go through periods of not realizing that it's all fresh to them every single day, every single week. So it's a really unfair, I think, disease where you have very little control over your thought processes and then your emotions and then even your bodily functions, depending on how the disease progresses. Would anyone else like to share?
Hey, how you going?
Hi, Mark.
I just thought I'd say something. Yeah, gentleman, Mem, yeah, he really hit it on the head there. My father's just got started first stage of dementia, and that's what we are as a family. Some of the things he says is sort of he repeats something that happened 20 years ago to us, my partner, and that are really good with it. We just go along with it. And he's got system in his life. My mother's teacher and that, so she looks after him. But he's a housewife at home, and he's got his system that he goes through every day, and just that how we communicate with him. Because some people aren't very not that they're compassionate, they just don't understand that from being around him you can understand it's very frustrating. He'll look at me and say, "Oh, I forgot," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's all right, mate," and I'll just say, tell him the story about, when the woman that put $10 in your pocket because he's at a market, he sells plants at a market. He keeps talking about how the lady put $20 in her pocket, and we just encourage it. It really helps him, I think. I'm sort of part-time carer. I just go and help him every month now and do his lawns and all that. And unfortunately, it's quite debilitating, and it's very it doesn't it'll hit anybody. Hit anybody, no matter age, ethnicity, everything. It's got no
Doesn't have any rules. It's
I was
very
looking for
unfair.
it doesn't discriminate.
No.
But, it's just
Thank you for sharing, Mark.
no worries.
I think, if I pick out a point there that you said in terms of, Alzheimer's dementia doesn't discriminate and it doesn't care about ethnicity. And I want you to think about that for just about every health ailment, just about every condition or illness or disease or symptom that can happen, because anyone can be affected by anxiety, depression, dementia. What's the word I'm looking for? Dependence on alcohol and or other drugs. Anyone has the potential to be affected by it. There are hereditary, genetic predisposing factors. There are environmental factors. There are your own factors about how you live your life, about where you live, even coming down to the suburb that you live in. There is a lot of research into certain suburbs and certain types of suburb, whether they're high socioeconomic, low socioeconomic, and so on. So people will have certain risk factors or indicators leading to a higher chance of developing something. For example, different family relationships or experiencing trauma early on can contribute it can increase a person's chance quite significantly of developing PTSD, of developing an AOD concern, of becoming homeless, and the list goes on. But it's not a guarantee. And just because someone might not have experienced trauma, just because someone might not have experienced divorce in their family early on, it doesn't mean they still won't be affected by something that maybe that population of people would. So I want you to think about the people that you work with. They could be from so many different backgrounds. And we've talked about culture quite a lot. And I keep coming back to it, that culture means so many things. And so when we think about someone as being Australian, Aboriginal, Indian, Greek, when we think about that, we're thinking about their ethnicity. We're thinking about their origin. Culture is that, and gender, and age, and where you live, and. There's so many things to it. So when you're working with people, think about, what can I do to improve this relationship, to make this helpful for them and for me? How can I communicate better or differently? We've spoken about the use of interpreters. We've spoken about the use of pulling in a colleague or a friend or a family member of the client, and these are perfectly fine. But we don't want to keep doing that. What can happen, for example, when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues are constantly called in to communicate with other Aboriginal clients or be a sounding board? What can happen is something called cultural load, where they're just constantly used for that. Now, they might have beautiful relationship building skills, and they might have a connection with a person, but there are so many cultures and differences in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. So chances are that they're from the same community, could be quite slim. And if they are from different communities, well, you've got a whole lot of other turbulence that might be present in terms of talking to different clans and different countries. So be mindful of that before we call in someone else, which is not a bad thing, but think about, what can I do to improve this? Or what can I do to contribute to helping this? Not all the time we need improvement. Sometimes things go well, but not all the time do things go well either. So if you've, just reflected in that activity and while we've been chatting, maybe think about, if you had that time again with someone, would you do it differently? Would you do it the same? There's no wrong answer. You reflect on, was it helpful? Was it unhelpful? What would I do next time if I was approached by that person or that interaction again? And if you do the same thing, wonderful. If you change, wonderful. Either way, you're reflecting and you're growing in that space. Little quote here. Communication, the human connection, is the key to personal and career success. You can take all of the quotes in the world, the ones we share in class and the ones you hear outside, with a grain of salt. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not helpful. But I think they offer, a way to reflect, or a way to start a discussion, or a way to think about, is that relevant or is that not relevant at all for me? So within workplaces, you will have, and if you don't, run away, but you will have these two communication tools. You will have policies, many, and you will have procedures, many. So procedures, protocols, the words are interchangeable. Policies are the direction, the guidelines, the way that we have to do something, what's important. We can look at work health safety. There'll be policies on that. We can look at dress code. There'll be policies on that. We can look at smoking on the grounds with clients, driving company vehicles, driving your own vehicle, time of operating hours. There'll be policies on all of this in your workplace. Your procedures or your protocols are the way to do it. So it won't necessarily detail how to drive a car. It's assumed that you have a driver's license. Most jobs want you to come with a driver's license, but it will give you guidelines on where the car is parked, the hours that you can drive the car, who can be in the car, and so on. There'll be procedures on how to maintain a safe workplace. So reporting hazards, reporting risks, reporting things that go wrong. This is, lights out. This is fire alarms not working. This is slips in the corridor, things like that. So both sets of documents are incredibly important. You will be asked to read through just about everything in your first couple of days, your first week. It will be overwhelming. You will not remember half of it. If you do, amazing, but chances are you won't. There's so much happening. Plus, you're trying to learn the job and meet the clients and meet everyone and do the work. So depending on how you get launched into the job, whether slowly or straight into the deep end, you will be given these and you'll be asked to, read through them and try and memorize them. The reason it's done this way is that you need to know them early on. You don't want to wait till 6 months down the track and go, oh, we have a WHS policy. I didn't know that. And so companies can say, well, Christina got told where the policies and procedures are, and Christina got told to read them in her first week. So I don't know why she's mopping up a wet floor with loose wires all over the place. I don't know why. So it's important to know that these exist and know how to find them. In terms of knowing every single one, it will take time and you need to get there, but take it with a grain of salt. You're not silly people. You know generally what's safe, what's unsafe, what's okay, what's not okay. And if any point, stop and think about something before you do, but be aware that these exist and you need to know them as best as possible. Yep. That. So these specifically communication policies and protocols ensure compliance with legislation. So they didn't just get made up out of nowhere. They relate to things. They relate to the WHS Act of 2011. They relate to the Privacy Act of 1988 off the top of my head. They relate to all of these federal and or state acts and policies and guidelines that have been put out, and then the workplace has adapted them for that workplace specifically. They demonstrate commitment to effective communication. It's ensuring that communication is fair for all clients and employees, and it provides guidance for staff. So when in doubt, read a procedure, speak to your manager. You must adhere to communication policies, all policies. You must represent the organization in accordance with these policies, and you must provide information to clients in accordance with these policies. So if a client asks you, why do you do this particular thing, or what's that based on? I wouldn't recommend giving a copy to the client to take away, but certainly you could read through a document yourself, or you could simply state, this is based off this policy that we have. I'm happy to show it to you when you're next in the office, or I'm happy to bring it out. I just need to take it back with me. I will say with a grain of salt, you'll check with your organizations, but it's not wrong or bad to have a client take it. It's just not necessarily helpful information. So just, be wary of that. The policies will include information that states a purpose, that states the related legislation it concerns. It will look at the organizational commitment to the policy. What is the organization saying that they will do to this? It will detail roles and accountabilities. So it will state senior managers are responsible for, managers are responsible for, employees are responsible for. And it will have communication strategies. So there might be communication plans or communication strategies, things that detail best practice communication. Now, it won't be the ins and outs of how to communicate per se, but it will be around, protocols on emails, protocols on phone calls, when you have your phone on, when you have your phone off. They detail standards that are to be met. They detail steps to be followed. They give direction to further information. And then there's a process for review. Your organization will detail when these are reviewed. If you feel something is out of date, feel free to bring it up with your manager. Give some reasons as to why you think it's out of date. For example, federal government has passed new legislation on something, and so these new integral details need to be updated in your internal policies, for example. But there are usually policy teams or policy and practice teams within every organization. No matter big or small, unless you're a family-run house, which I don't know of any that exist, but most organizations will have teams dedicated to writing and reviewing. These policies and procedures must be easily accessible. They cannot be hidden. You cannot have to jump through hoops to get them. They need to be accessed on your organizational intranet page, in a filing system, on paper in the office. They need to be easily accessible. They need to be up to date. And again, usually the policy procedure team will look at this. And they need to be communicated to all staff. So when something comes up, or should a situation occur where the organization feels people should be aware, a reminder of a policy, it will likely be emailed. Sometimes policies, procedures get posted up on notice boards, physical notice boards, depending on your office environment, but they should be emailed. They may be communicated in a team meeting. You might have to do some e-learning based on them, but you will be told if something's changed or if everyone needs a reminder of something because of an incident. So respectful communication is that in a manner demonstrating respect, accepting individual differences, and upholds rights. So how can we achieve this? Well, respecting and encouraging individual difference in the workplace, promoting and upholding a discrimination-free workplace, and included in all levels of planning, policies, and procedures. Now, that last point, usually above your pay grade or a totally different team. But the first two, you can contribute to and you should be contributing to. Just like I mentioned about culture, diversity is the same. Diversity looks at and celebrates the differences within people or groups. Everybody, I would argue, is diverse. Maybe one of these labels that you see on the screen isn't relevant for you. Maybe it is. Wonderful. But I believe everyone is diverse in your thinking, in your emotions, in how you express yourself, in what hobbies you enjoy, in what you like to study, in how you like to study, in how you interact with your family, with your friends. All of this makes you you and diverse. Now, a lot of these things aren't known to people outside of your circle, and you probably don't broadcast these things that make you you, and that's fine. I'm not saying they need to be, but I encourage people to think about their diversity and how this impacts them, yourself, and the workplace. What are you bringing into the workplace? Because you will have things you like and you will have things you don't like in the workplace, and you will have bias and you will have judgment, good or not good. You have the principles, the values, the beliefs that you were raised around, and these impact your working with clients, you're working with people, consciously or unconsciously. They're not necessarily bad or wrong. It's the expression of judgment, the expression of bias, the expression of feelings that can lead to challenging relationships. So you have just been upgraded to manager. and you have been asked to think about your work with newly arrived refugees. So I want you to think about, you'll go back in your groups, and I want you to think about 3 examples of how you will promote respectful, inclusive communication. So think about the client group, refugees, newly arrived refugees. Think about, do they speak English? Maybe, maybe not. Have they showered in a while, depending on how they traveled? Maybe, maybe not. Have they got or had access to good healthcare? Maybe, maybe not. How do they feel about service providers? You won't know this straight away, but something to consider. So I want you to think about all of these things. Feel free to Google anything, chat amongst yourselves around what might be important for newly arrived refugees. And within your pairs, within your groups, you're going to come up with at least 3 examples. You can come up with 20, but at least 3 of how you will promote respectful, inclusive communication. So I don't want you to eventually write down or share back what the challenges might be, but how you might work through those challenges, how you will promote respectful, inclusive communication. Does that make sense? In terms of working in an organization where you're working with newly arrived refugees, or you're probably working with lots of refugees, but in the context of thinking about newly arrived refugees, would anyone like to share the recommendations, ideas you came up with to communicate as effectively as possible with people of this population? Peter, over to you.
Unmute. I forgot what is it? Alt A,
Oh,
I think, or Alt S turns it back on. Yeah, Chris had a couple. Started off with some great ones. Firstly, to get them multilingual GP.
cool.
So for that, that addresses lots of stuff around health, obviously, and then getting them into some community groups, like-minded community groups, maybe hook them up. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of culturally diverse groups out there that meet, starting with a Facebook group, maybe if they've got a phone that's got internet. Yeah, lots of stuff like that. I can't remember what I said now. I wrote it down. Yeah, I don't know, I forget.
I think you were just talking about AFL.
No, I was not. I was.
All right, you got us there.
um,
What did we
Oh,
say?
yeah,
Social groups.
Social
yeah,
group.
and yeah, sorry, about teaching them about the Australian culture. Like everyone thinks they're unique, but like Australia is a little bit different, especially if you're comparing to some of the East Asian countries. Yeah, a little bit different. And yeah, and having some sort of formal feedback thing in place whereby you can, like, a check-in, to just see how they went with the GP, see how the Facebook thing's going, or whatever the case may be. Yeah, that was where we were going. Then we talked about AFL.
Okay, you've recovered yourselves. Well done. Good points. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts people want to share? Mem.
I can talk forever. I've got ADHD, so you'll probably hear a lot from me.
This is the perfect space for you.
Exactly. I was just expressing to my group that I wasn't a refugee, but I was certainly an immigrant, and I came here and my first language wasn't English by any means, because my parents didn't know English. And then progressing to school and stuff, it was quite a challenge, and I can understand with the refugees coming here, some of the first things that I would like to do as an immigrant, respect. I mean, values and culture is a significant part of our identity, and in order to feel inclusive, we can introduce them to the broader community that they come from as well. So then they can be able to expand, and family is a big one. So do they have any family? How are you going to connect with them? And what about the family that you got overseas? Like, how do you know how to get onto social networking, Zoom calls, and all that kind of stuff? You know, to make them feel like they still have a connection, even though they're making a new start. Like, what are their dreams? What are their aspirations? And how can we forward them in the right direction? And, you know, it's just, I guess it all falls into place after that, you know, and we eventually assimilate, you know, and be proud Australians.
Well, that's the goal with any migration is assimilation, but the right way. And we could go down a lengthy conversation about assimilation or forced and things like that. But you raise excellent points, Mem, around, you know, connecting people to each other here, connecting people to family and friends back home. That's going to be very important for someone's mental health, and embracing a new location, because most people who come by refugee status have left something that's quite uncomfortable, maybe dangerous. So they've left for reasons, which is why the refugee status is there, as opposed to an immigrant who probably has more choice in, or their family has more choice in moving to another country. Thank you for sharing that, ma'am. I'm seeing some restless pets, which I love. So maybe they want you to take a break. So let's take a break. Okay, we're getting back into it. Showing me we're almost getting back into it. Sorry guys, let's get rid of that. I don't need that.
You got my camera on mute. Can't get it on.
Oh, okay. I turned it off just while we're in break. Let me get it back on for you. So I've just asked you to start the video. That should work. Here you are. Cool. Brilliant. We talk a lot about our individualism, our individual contributions to the work that we do, to our relationships, to our engagement in the workplace, and so on. It's really important to think about the group dynamics, because when you are in this space together, you are individuals who are in a group. When you're in the workplace, you are individuals who are in a group. And very basically, groups are two or more people that share or discuss or have a common interest. Now, in the workplace, that common interest is work. In your social groups, that common interest could be anything. You know that. So within the workplace, as a group, everyone brings in their own values, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and everyone is expected to work together. This ensures harmony. This ensures we get the job done. This ensures we do the right thing for our clients and support our clients as best as possible. We behave appropriately, safely, respectfully. Sometimes things work incredibly well, and sometimes things don't go to plan, and sometimes things don't go well. And there are so many factors to this, how each individual feels on the day. What's happened for you that morning, the night before, the day before? Is it your birthday? Is it someone else's birthday? Did you eat breakfast? Are you working with a colleague that you don't like? And maybe there are reasons for that, and maybe there aren't. Have you got a full caseload and you've got lots of feelings about that? But you as individuals need to continuously work towards being in a group. Unless you want to work remotely with no communication with anyone else doing the same job, you are going to be in a group. Even if you work remotely in an organization. For example, I work remotely here with Hader, but I have colleagues. I have people I communicate with, other lecturers, managers, and so on. So I work in a group, even though we're all remote in that sense. So everyone needs to contribute to the group process and the group dynamics. If one person's out, it can throw the whole group out. And that's not a blame, that's not a don't do it. Again, we all have stuff going on and we all have times where we don't feel our best self, and that's fine. It's what we do with that. So be mindful. I'm sure you've all worked in some organization. It could be McDonald's. It could be, I don't know, Video Easy. It doesn't matter. I'm sure you've all worked somewhere where you've had to be in a group in order to get the job done. That is no different in its basic principles in the work that you'll do in this field. What makes it more challenging is any personal experience that you bring, any education that you bring, and the clients and their intricacies that they bring as well. There are lots of ways to get through challenging times in a team. I always talk about reflection for ourselves, but you can engage in group reflective practice. I think it's a wonderful tool. I've done this many times in different organizations. There are steps that you can follow. Different authors have written different models for self-reflective practice and group reflective practice. You could have this in an informal team meeting. You can even just ask to speak to someone and share concerns, thoughts, things that aren't working for you respectfully. In thinking about delivering and being a part of effective interpersonal conversation or communication. So interpersonal is the relationship, the dynamics with another person. Intrapersonal is me and self, and inter is with others. So you want to think about your message and how you deliver it. We've spoken before that the words that we say only make up around 7, tops 10% of our communication interaction. The rest of it is non-verbal, our body language, how we present, and our tone. So what you said, what you're trying to say, is it how you intended? You cannot control how other people react to anything. You cannot control and try to negotiate how everyone will respond, react to what you say. Now, that doesn't give you permission to go, well, I'm saying what I say and everyone else can do whatever they want. No. We need to be mindful of other people that we're engaging with. We need to think about what are their needs? What are my needs? We all have needs we bring. Maybe a small child is asking mum or dad for ice cream. The child has a need that they're asking for. And mum or dad has a need as well because they don't want to give the young child ice cream, probably. So it's really effective to think about what you're saying and how you're saying it and how does it meet the need of the other person. How you listen and interpret what is said. We heard earlier from the group around listening and how important it is and being present and listening to understand versus listening to respond. Most human beings want to say and do the right thing. It's wonderful. But if we're constantly thinking about, okay, I better listen and I better try and understand and I better think about what I need to respond to, you're going to get lost in it. If you don't have the words to respond, it doesn't matter. If you say, whoa, I don't know how to respond to that, that's great. how you deliver that. We're not going to do that in a cocky way, of course. Your body language. Are you sitting slouched in the seat? Have you got your arms crossed? Are you standing and pacing? What does your face say? And using signs and gestures. Our hand signals will differ, sometimes minimally and sometimes greatly amongst different cultures and ethnicities. You can't know everything about every culture and ethnicity, but you can ask, you can try and learn. You can think about how you're using your hands and is it effective? I'm a hand talker. My hands are going when I'm talking. Not right now because I'm purposely holding them in my lap. So you just don't see too many flying hands on screens, but I'm sure you have seen them in my class. So how would the other person take that? Most of the time, if you're communicating respectfully, your hand signals and gestures are not saying anything inappropriate, but you never know. Pointing is considered rude in a lot of cultures outside of Australia. So maybe you're pointing at something or someone, and that's impacting someone. When we consider person-centered and rights-based, we go back to this person-centered as the idea of putting someone in the center, in the middle, as the focus point for our interactions. The work that we do is not on or for or to. Our work is with people. We are working with people on their recovery, on their return to work, on their return to pre-illness life, whatever it is. We're working with them. Can't make them, can't force them to do anything. If they choose, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm going back to old life, so be it. Now, where things get tricky is if you are in a position where you need to report things to police or magistrates or hospitals, you have to do that. But a lot of the times, if a client says, I'm out, I'm out. And that can happen, and that's okay. But in considering person-centeredness and considering everybody's rights, that's the rights of the clients and the rights of you and the rights of the workplace, we don't want to ignore or dismiss difference. A really fun, if it's your definition of fun, a really fun conversation topic is to consider the statement, I don't see color. Now, I'm not going to ask you to share in this space what that might mean for you, but for a long time, I don't see color was seen as a helpful, inclusive statement. And people who said this are coming from a good place, are genuinely thinking, it doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter what your gender is, we're friends or whatever. And this is typically said by children who typically do not see differences. They see that kid who likes to play soccer and I like to play soccer, and that kid has a ball, so I'm going to play with that kid, and that kid's my friend. And that's a beautiful way to approach friendships. As children age, we start to see differences, and we start to see our differences within ourselves and then how we relate to the world. And then there's a movement that say the concept of I don't see color as disrespectful because you're saying you don't see my differences. So it's an interesting take on the statement. You can reflect on that if you like. Either way, I want you to notice differences. I want you to notice that someone has a different tone than you, that someone has a different skin color to you, that someone has different makeups of their face. I mean, genetic makeups of nose, ears, All of that. I want you to notice these things. I want you to be observant. I want you to notice how other people sit and stand and move. This doesn't take a lot of effort. You could be creepy like I am and just watch all the people on the train. Just don't do it in a creepy way. But just be observant of the clients that you're working with and your colleagues that you're working with. Recognize the difference. You don't have to point it out. You can in a polite, professional way. I'm noticing that you do, like, say, be, want something. That's different to how I'm saying, seeing, doing, being. Can you tell me more about that? I'm really interested. I've always known it this way. Can you tell me about what it means for you? We always talk about being curious, not sitting someone down in a police questioning room and firing 21 questions. So recognize the difference. It can be acknowledged, it cannot, it depends on the circumstances, but it is important to notice that everybody has a difference or differences, and how might you work with them? And do you need to learn anything about them or that culture or yourself to work better with them? And this middle point around recognizing that people have the right to be different. People might be genetically different from you. People might choose to be different from who they have been known to be, and people may choose to be different from society, from their family, from you, and that's okay. Again, you can do and be anyone you choose. You have to think about the impact for you and the impact for other people. I'm not saying that determines what you do and don't do, not at all. You do you. Everyone can do them. But in being us, in doing things, in demonstrating behavior, you have to think about, how does this impact the world around me? Good, not so good. How do I fit in? How do I help other people fit in? The term CALD or called stands for culturally and linguistically diverse, generally followed by people or populations or groups. So people who are from a CALD background may need specific strategies to support communication and reduce barriers. Typically, when someone is deemed from a CALD background, this is someone that is from a non-English speaking population. So someone who might be English from the UK or English from the United States are typically not deemed CALD. They share a common language being English. Now, if someone is from the UK but is also they were born somewhere else, or their parents are born somewhere else, yes, they would be considered CALD. So this is typically referred to ethnicity, but it does consider lots of aspects of culture. Ask what their preferred language is. Don't see the paperwork and assume, oh, this person is. I better get a translator who speaks that language. That might seem really helpful. It is helpful. You might be right. You're probably right. You could be wrong. I mentioned before, the Aboriginal culture has multiple languages, hundreds of languages. People from India can speak multiple languages. People from India can have multiple religious aspects and influences in their life. So ask people, ask family, ask referrers, what language does this person speak? How can I best communicate with them? And this also considers the environment. Is a phone call better for a first interaction? Is meeting in person better for a first interaction? Is it in the client's home? Is it in the client's family home? Is it in your office? Is it in the park? Now, this can differ around what you can and can't do depending on the organization you work with. The organizations I've worked with in the past where I was meeting a client for the first time was more often than not in their home. Sometimes in the office if they felt more comfortable, or particularly if they were coming with a family member or a friend to help support them. And then there are times I met them in hospital, in custody, but I didn't meet clients for the first time in the community. I saved that for later on. So, you know, in a park or something. Sometimes I'd have meetings in the library as well. Later on, you need to think about what's safe for the client. Maybe meeting in the home isn't that safe, but later on. Your first appointment, depending on the organization you work for, if you're in an inpatient rehab facility, well, they're obviously going to come to the facility. And think about gender. It's not an assumption that all males want to work with males and all females want to work with females. Females can have an aversion to working with females. Males can have an aversion to working with males, females to males, males to females, and so on. And then people who don't identify with one of those binary genders might have other preferences. So it's not something that's usually, I guess, discussed or questioned. It doesn't mean that it can't be, though. So if you want to ask a question around, I'm a female worker, are you okay with me coming to your house, to the appointment, to the whatever? Sometimes you won't have the ability to bring in a colleague who's of a different gender, or pass the client on to that colleague who might be a better working relationship because of their gender. Sometimes it might not be possible. You might not have that other gender around at all, employed maybe with the workplace. They may not be around because they're busy. They may not be around because they're on leave. They may not be available to take on more clients. So just consider, if that's not an option, how can you work with the client? What would help? What would you say? What would you do? Clients have a right to say no, and that's okay. You have a right to say no, and that's okay. But whenever you say no to something, whatever it is, just check out. Why am I saying no? What's going on for me? Sometimes people have a tendency to speak louder when that other person doesn't speak the same language. This is not helpful. A person doesn't have a problem with the decibels of your voice. They have a problem with not understanding the words that you're saying because they do not speak that language. So don't resort to speaking louder. Now, if someone has a hearing aid and they speak English or they speak the language you're speaking, maybe speaking louder is the way to go. Maybe later on supporting the client to work out how the hearing aid works, or referring them to a service to improve their hearing ability, whatever. But yelling can be seen as quite rude, quite offensive. Speak clearly. Use simple sentence construction, and this was spoken about earlier in terms of speaking with teenagers. Don't use jargon, don't use fancy words. If you're working with refugees, particularly newly arrived refugees, they don't understand jargons, they don't understand acronyms. They may not understand English for that matter. They don't understand all of this. So speak simply. Don't dumb it down that you're being ignorant, but speak in a way that people can understand, and check for understanding. Check along the way. Does that make sense to you? Are you understanding me? Did that, was that clear what I said? Can you tell me what that means for you? And listen out for a person's tone of voice, their speech pattern, the words that they say, how they speak, even down to how someone might pronounce something. So, you know, I might say do you want to go? Or I might say, do you want to go? And then it's not bad to, you know, drop the T and all of that. It's not an English language lesson here, but listen to those things because it's helpful if you match as well. I'm not saying you must speak the way a client speaks. We certainly don't encourage swearing and any derogatory language. But listen to how a client speaks because that might be how they understand as well. Or it might be a way of connecting with a person. Maybe if you are speaking as fluently and eloquently as you possibly can, maybe that's you. Maybe that causes a disrupt in the engagement with a client because they think you're too fancy for them. Just throwing things out there. Again, you don't have to change who you are. You do have to consider how am I interacting with a person and how is it helping or not helping. So think about individualizing people. Not all people who are Greek are the same type of Greek. If you talk to people who are living or were born close to Crete or close to Turkey or close to Macedonia, you will have all kinds of people who identify as different Greeks, yeah, because of borders changing in those particular locations over the years that those countries have existed. And then the rivalry around who invented baklava, for example. Yeah, so don't lump everyone together. And try to find information for people. We've spoken about interpreters and having that, but try to find written information or audio information for people that they can read in their language. And again, don't assume a person from India speaks Hindu. They may not. They may not. Ask them. Got a video here. There are some principles or strategy suggestions that are mentioned in this video. So I'm asking you to pay attention to it because I want to chat about those strategies that are mentioned in the video after. So see if you can write down, amazing, or if that's not for you, that's fine. Just remember, listen out for things that they talk about in terms of strategies. Now, if anything goes wrong, just yell out if you can't hear it or see it. Okay, so what did you hear just in our open space here? What did you hear? You're welcome to share your thoughts on the particular population group that was being talked about, and also or reflect on those suggestions that were made. Share what you heard, share what you think. Over to you guys, jump in when you want.
Yeah, it's important that you that you know the especially the women, their background and how they come to this country with the visa. A lot of in-depth background work before you sort of get into it, and a lot of them recommend to just discuss those things with their visa, and they might be reluctant to tell you anything because of the status of their visa, the way if they've been forced into a marriage or controlled as sort of thing, as I think. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Something that I pick up in that video is, around that forced marriage and choice. We're so choice friendly and rights oriented, yeah, here in Australia, where so many countries are not. And so a woman that has been forced into marriage or an arranged marriage, probably hasn't had a lot of choice, if any. So that can be quite new, exciting, overwhelming, confronting. Imagine you've never known to make choices and all of a sudden you can. That would be quite impactful. Peter.
Yeah, so especially for the women, as a male and a female, someone that is talking to them, an Australian, we would think a lot of the stuff that they've gone through is a violation of human rights. You know, we would be feeling and thinking that that's unacceptable, but that's their real world.
Yep.
And that's, you know, thousands and thousands of years of culture right there, that is really dear to them. And they're just doing the best they can, you know, to fit within that. So it's quite a balancing act. When to us it's against our core generally, unless you have the in-depth knowledge of that background.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Something on a very simpler level, but just demonstrating differences in culture. In Chinese cultures, it's the norm and expected that children will care for their parents once their parents are aging or becoming unwell or retired or of that older age generation. It's expected that children will just care for them. That's part of the culture. And so it can be seen very differently here. In general, and it's so broad and general, but in general, we have a culture norm for our parents to go into care, whether that be a home or care in the home, like the home that the parents live in. And that's not bad or wrong, just a difference. And so, you know, I've spoken to Chinese people who say that's outrageous and we don't do that. And I say, well, don't you want your freedom? And they say, well, I don't know. This is what I do. This is what I have to do. This is what we're taught. And so there's no, I wish I would do anything else. That's it. So that's a difference just in, you know, something small and somewhat insignificant. Any other thoughts to share? Okay. We'll look at, where are we? All right, we'll look at just one more slide real quick and then we'll take a break. So let me bring this one up. Okay, so things we've spoken about already, but just wanted to highlight in terms of speaking to someone who's from a different ethnicity. You want to face them. Sorry, well, this one's particularly hearing impaired, but that open facing body language is super important for people from a different culture. There's reasons why you might stand to the side or sit to the side, and we can talk about them another time. But generally, seeing you, so you're not hidden. And this is extremely important when someone is hearing impaired, because they want to read your lips. They want to see your facial expressions. They want to see your whole body. I've spoken about hand signals. We've briefly touched on the concept of touch. If someone is visually impaired, check in if that's appropriate for them, if that's going to be helpful for them to move around. And remember your facial expressions and remember how you're feeling in the moment. Sometimes we can pull a face and we're not aware of it. but check in, is my face telling a different story than the words or what I'm trying to communicate to someone? We've spoken that gestures can be very different in different cultures and can take on different meanings. Even as simply as a thumbs up is not universally good. It is in a lot of Western worlds. It's not necessarily in all worlds. Touch and eye contact. So touch, my basic rule for touch here is don't do it. There's very few times where touch is needed and or beneficial. You really need to think about, what am I trying to achieve here? And what is the history of the client and how do they interpret touch? Not everybody likes touch, clients or not. I'm sure you've met or have someone in your life who doesn't like touch, doesn't like hugs. Sometimes I'm an annoying friend and I hug those friends that don't like touch. And you know, we've sorted in our relationship where that's okay, but I don't overdo it, of course. But going up and hugging someone that you don't know, who you know doesn't like touch, is not going to end well for you or for them. They're going to be extremely uncomfortable. They may even hit you. So don't do it. Touch with clients can send very, very mixed messaging. I've worked with a client in the past that had autism spectrum disorder, and she loved to hug. Loved touch. I think it's beautiful. I think it's wonderful. I am a touchy-feely person myself. But when it comes to clients, it is not appropriate and it can send different messages. So working with this client, straight away I was being hugged. I didn't even do anything and I was being hugged. That was her way of expressing gratitude and engagement with a person. She would hug anyone, literally anyone. So we had to work with what's safe and who's safe and everything. But for me, it's just a boundary I want to keep. So I had to educate the client around why hug isn't appropriate with me and why hugs are not appropriate with some people and where they're perfectly wonderful and you should keep doing that. And eventually we were working towards a handshake. So whenever she wanted to hug, which was all the time, we would handshake. And so we would handshake all the time. It was a long process. You know, it was me giving into the hug, not reciprocating entirely, but identifying straight away we're hugging and this is something we're not going to do and we're trying to work on. What was the thing that we're trying to do? And this and this and this all the time. And we got there eventually. And I needed to do it in a safe way where she didn't feel she was doing something wrong, because she absolutely wasn't. It's just not something that I recommend. And most people in this field will not recommend touch, especially hugs to you of a client. Now, sometimes it can be really comforting if someone's upset to offer a hand of comfort. And I say, think about what's beneficial and what's helpful and what's going to be safe for the client and for you. Generally speaking, the upper arm, shoulder to elbow, is safer. And generally speaking, around the knee area is safer. Think about anatomy and think about where other body parts sit and what's okay and what's not okay, and where you don't want to be considered crossing any lines. So I recommend, if you feel like touch is appropriate, this elbow to shoulder, that kind of region. Don't go up into the top and the neck and things like that. Don't do that. Stay away from there. And it's a gentle kind of touch, not quite hold. Don't, you know, put your hand around and things like that. If you think that's going to be beneficial and helpful and not confusing. And in terms of eye contact, there are lots of things going around. Some cultures like it, some don't. There's a common misconception that all Aboriginal people don't like eye contact and it's considered rude. This is incorrect. Some do not like it. Some cultures have women and men shouldn't look each other in the eye, but this is not exclusive across the board with everyone. So don't make these assumptions. Ask. Generally speaking, in Western world, eye contact is considered professional and engaging and that you're there with a person. If you're looking everywhere else, typically in Western cultures, this is considered rude. So go with a good level of eye contact, ask, and get a gauge. Is the person particularly avoiding me and my eyes? So do I need to look at what can I change in this? Let me just double check our sound is on. I was going to tell you that that video had no audio words, and then I thought, no, well, it'll just ruin the experience for you. So that was all part of the video there, of just using words on the screen and some elevator music in the background. If you're born in Australia, I want you to think about what it might be like for an immigrant, irrespective of immigrant, refugee, asylum status, irrespective, just someone who wasn't born here and wasn't born in an English-speaking country. Just take a moment now. You don't need to share thoughts. What the experience might be like for someone who is coming here, is here, and doesn't speak English. And if you are a person that wasn't born here and then you came from a non-English speaking country, think about your first impressions of people here and how that made you feel and what you understood or what you didn't understand. Maybe you knew a little bit of English, maybe you didn't. I want you to think about visually, what would it be like if you can see my face and you can see my lips moving and you hear sound? You have no idea the words that I'm saying. And now imagine I have a face like this. And these universal emotions are that universal. The word might not be anger, but that might be a translation word, or the emotion might be the same. So I've got a face like this, and you don't understand the words that I'm saying. Think about how it'd make you feel. What you'd want to do or not do. How you would react or not react. And imagine that impacts you for the next week, month, year, 10 years living in this country. Like I keep saying, we all have bad days. We all have days where sometimes our face is saying more than our words. But you need to think about, if you're with your friends all day, doesn't really matter. You don't want to upset your friends either. That's not fair. That's not right. By careless actions or by being rude or inappropriate behavior. But we really want to be mindful of how clients interpret what we're saying and what we're doing and what we're not actually saying. Again, we can't control everyone's reactions and interpretations, but we can try. And if you're doing this and you say, I have no idea why they were angry with me or scared of me, I think you need to check yourself in the mirror and see what your face is doing when you're talking. We will have lots more time to talk about motivational interviewing. We will cover it in a lot more detail in another subject. It will not be the detail and depth that motivational interviewing deserves, I highly recommend you go and do some research in motivational interviewing. We've talked about it briefly. We will talk about it more. I encourage you to do some more research. This is a directive, client-centered counseling style for provoking behavior change by helping clients to explore and resolve uncertainties. It is a communication tool. It is not an intervention. It is a way of communicating with people. This is not limited to working with clients. Practice MI skills on your family and friends and watch your conversation unfold. Don't practice MI on a fellow worker because they will say, "Are you MIing me?" And they will know. And it's not a bad thing, but they will know. Which then is kind of good because they see what you're trying to do. So motivational interviewing is not meant to be coercive or persuasive or controlling. It can have persuasive properties indirectly. So with motivational interviewing, you are wanting people to think about things themselves, to have control of their lives, to put them at the center as the expert of them, and think about and weigh up choices. Motivational interviewing is predominantly used, a lot of key principles in motivational interviewing are predominantly used through behavior change. So very much so in the work that you'll do, particularly in the AOD space. Keep using drugs, don't keep using drugs. Where MI can have persuasive influences is asking the right questions, behaving in the right way can encourage clients to think about, oh, if I keep using drugs, this might be very bad for me. I might think about change. You haven't told them to change. You haven't said change is a good idea. You haven't said if you don't change, bad things are going to happen. You have simply asked the right questions, framed the right words, and we'll go through examples of this later on to help them think about change. Now, the difference with coercive approaches is they have a strong sense of authority and they have a sense of I'm right and you should listen to me. If you remember Matilda from the 1990s where dad was going, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm big, you're small, and so on. Yeah, that's coercive. That's a coercive approach. Clearly didn't work for Matilda because she went and did her own thing, and kudos to her. And it's not the communication style we want at all. Now, sometimes if you're parents to human children, parents to animal children, you might have a coercive tone, and that's okay, right? Again, there's limits and what's okay or not okay, but we're talking here in the context of our workplace and what's okay with clients and what's okay with our colleagues. Now, if you're a manager, sometimes you need to give a direction. That is not coercive. That's saying, I need this done. This needs to be done by. I need you to look into, and so on. These are 5 principles of motivational interviewing. I'll let you read through these. Motivational interviewing has a strong sense of walking alongside that with that I keep talking about. Motivational interviewing is rooted in that kind of behavior and experience. Sometimes clients will be quite desperate and quite unsure and wanting someone to tell them what to do. There's a lot of reasons people can want that, lots and lots of reasons. It's not bad. It's where they're at, and that's okay. Lots of reasons, particularly trauma. I don't want you to make a decision for a client. I know it might seem that you're helping them. You can acknowledge this seems really hard for you, and I wish I could give you an answer. I just can't. It's just not my decision to make. And they might ask, well, what would you do in my position? And some of you in the class have experiences in AOD, in mental health, in homelessness, in lots of things that you'll work with clients. And some of you might have experienced that. And we've touched on a little bit, do we share our experiences? Do I not? And I always talk about, is it beneficial? Is it helpful? Is it safe? So if you've had this experience and a client says to you, what would you do? Well, I don't have an answer for you around what you should do or not do, and say and not say in this particular instance. If you have already expressed that you have a personal experience, you might share yours. If it's not something you want to share, don't share with clients. You have no obligation to share your experience, whatever that might be. And if you don't have a personal experience in this concern that the client is expressing, don't feel like you don't know what it might feel like either. Everyone, I'm pretty sure, has experienced something negative in their life that you can share in some kind of way, or share the process of learning, growing, overcoming adversity, and so on. So if a client's asking you, what would you do? You might find it helpful to say, I might think about, I might consider. I would recommend you don't say decisive things of I would do. Just because we don't want to seem like we're giving advice, telling the client what to do. That might be the best thing for them. That might be the right thing for them. Probably. I don't want it to come back to you when the client isn't successful in something and says, you told me. I don't want that to negatively affect a relationship, and I don't want the power taken away from a client. As hard as decision making can be, that's a person's right to decide. So be mindful in your choice of words and how you're helping a client problem solve. Now, some simpler things that have very little weight bearing on anything, like choosing a dinner option. Okay, that's very safe. If the options that the client is trying to decide on is, I don't know, potato bake or tacos, well, they're two incredibly challenging things to decide between, and I'd say, can you do both? If not, I'd probably go the tacos, depending on what flavor the tacos were. That's okay. But groundbreaking, life-changing decisions, try to support the client through that decision. Get them to think about, what does mum, dad, sister, brother, child, grandma, grandpa, friend think about this? And we've spoken about, using, let's say, grandma as a motivation. What would grandma say about this? Be mindful of when and how you use this in terms of them making a change for grandma. That's okay. But we talked about external motivation, internal motivation. How do we get the client to own that change as well? It might be okay. It might be great to think about grandma and getting healthier so you can spend more time with her. Wonderful. Touch wood, what if grandma passes away? If they've invested all of their change into grandma, that'd be really hard. Hard enough losing grandma that you really care about, but hard enough if all that self-change and care and health is wrapped up in it. So we don't want that to occur. Some very broad considerations of collaboration versus confrontation. Collaborating is working together. Confronting is strongly opposing and challenging. Confronting is strong and in your face, physically, metaphorically. And collaborating is generally softer, along the journey with. considering lots of options, considering other people's needs and wants in something and working together. That's all I have for you this evening in terms of our content. I will stop our recording now. So good night, good day to everyone watching later on.